What do video games, construction, and even medical equipment all have in common? They're all 3D modeled. But what is 3D modeling? According to Adobe, one of the largest computer design companies in the world, 3D modeling is the process of creating 3D objects using specialized software. These models can be used in films, gaming, architecture, product design, and more. Just a quick Google search can show you some of the more specialized things it can be used for. The most obvious use case that you've heard of is probably 3D printing. It's done both for business and for hobby purposes. I've personally 3D printed, and if you're interested in doing it, it's a great reason to get into 3D modeling. A good metaphor to understand 3D models is actually image files. In the same way you can make images by using different kinds of software, then exporting it into a file is really similar to how 3D modeling is done. We need to be able to create or get those image files before we can print them or do anything with them, or in our case, 3D models. So how do we make a 3D model? Well, in just the same way we would make an image file, we need to find some software. There's many different kinds of 3D modeling software. Each have their pros and cons. Some are more specialized, and some are more general purpose. Some are also much easier to learn, but far less powerful than others. For example, Blender is one of the biggest 3D modeling programs. It's incredibly versatile, and you can make just about any kind of model you want with it. However, it's much more difficult to learn than, say, an easier program like Tinkercad or Blockbench. Right now, picking the right software isn't very important. It's more important to understand the basic concepts of 3D modeling, since regardless of software, they all use the same underlying ideas. For now, we'll use a really simple one, Tinkercad. It's a free web app that we can do some basic 3D modeling in. It was one of the first 3D modeling programs I've ever used, and it serves as a great introduction to understand some of the core concepts of 3D modeling. To get started, head over to tinkercad.com and sign up. Now, from your dashboard, hit Create and let's get started modeling. The first thing we need to be able to do is move the camera around. We can hold right click to look around and the middle mouse button to pan. Let's make a simple pickup truck. We can use the shapes on the right here that Tinkercad provides us to make the base of the truck. We're essentially going to use different shapes to make a bigger shape. By grabbing these points, we can scale the shape around. And by dragging and clicking around, we can move it around. Let's bring it up off the ground and make it a bit taller. We can use cylinders for wheels and change the amount of sides, since a computer can't handle an infinite number of sides, like a real circle. We could change the color. Let's make the tires black and use these arrows to rotate it. By holding Shift and dragging, we can scale the whole object. And by holding Alt and dragging, we can scale both sides of the object, essentially mirroring it. Now if we click on the shape, hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V, we'll paste it. And by Shift and clicking, we can select multiple objects that we can then copy and paste. Now we have our wheels. Let's make our bed. To do that, we can cut a hole in this shape by using the hole shape. You can make any shape a hole. Wherever these two shapes will overlap will be where the hole extrusion is. By selecting the two shapes with Shift and clicking, we can hit Ctrl-G and merge them together and group them. Now we have our bed. Let's make our cab. We use a triangle and a rectangle together. You can see here that I'm selecting both objects to move them at the same time. And scaling them together too. Now we have our truck. To export it, just like you would an image file, let's hit the export button and select a file type. You can think of these like PNG and JPEG. The one we want is probably OBJ, since it's the most general purpose. It stands for object. Tinkercad will generate a zip file based on the name of our project, and inside of this file, we'll have the OBJ. You can see sometimes exported models don't export their orientation right. And since we're just focusing on modeling, this has no texture or color to it. Tinkercad is great, but has one core limitation. You can only manipulate shapes. Shapes are made up of faces. Faces are made up of edges. And edges are made up of two vertices. Here in this program, Blockbench, we have control over those vertices, edges, and faces. It allows us to make much more complex objects. If you're interested and want to keep learning about 3D modeling, I would recommend researching the different kinds of 3D modeling software and picking the one that best fits your needs. If you're not sure what your needs are, I would recommend either sticking with Tinkercad, or if you want something more advanced, learning Blender. There's plenty of how-to guides by professional 3D modelers on YouTube for how to do Blender. If you're interested in reading how to use Blender instead, one of the sources I found when researching this video is a book on how to use Blender. But keep in mind it's a much more difficult software to learn than Tinkercad. Whichever software you choose, the skills will transfer, so don't worry about picking the right one right now. I hope this video helped you, and good luck modeling.